What does it mean to be a flop? Because if I were to ask you this question, of course you would have a lot of names on your list. But being a flop may not necessarily mean what you think it means. And that's why we're back here on Money Talks, brought to you by Life Scholars. I am Anishilewo, Jimmy Anishilewo, and I'm here with our sports analyst Ayoola to discuss some of the most expensive transfer flops of all time. So Ayoola, let's start with this. What does it mean to be a flop?
Well, as you already mentioned, a lot of people would obviously look at a flop as someone who failed to deliver. But if you look at it from a financial perspective, we would look at a flop as someone who failed to live up to their price tag or how much they cost the club, and especially how their careers at the clubs eventually panned out. So, I mean, players can be flops even though they didn't cost a lot of money. That's obvious. But when you look at it strictly from a financial, or rather, it becomes even worse when you look at how much the club has actually invested into the player and what returns that they got from the player. I mean, some players might give a certain level of performance and you think, okay, it's fine. Maybe they're not a flop. But then if another player gives that same level of performance and the player costs 10 times as much, then you say, yes, this is a flop, because when you pay this amount of money for a player, there's a certain level of performance or expectations that you have. So, yeah, those are the type of players that would consider a financial flop.
Okay. So sorry to throw this to you as a curveball, but doesn't this mean that a player that was maybe signed on a free transfer cannot flop based on this logic?
No, not necessarily. Players can flop at any price. Even a player that you sign for €1, £1 can flop if they give you less value than you would have expected.
Less
Yeah,
value.
it's very
How can
difficult.
they less value of zero?
Yeah,
Because you
it's
you
still
signed them
possible
for
because
free.
at the end of the day, you would also pay these players salaries and things like that. So you will still expect a certain level of performance from any player that you sign. Even players from your academy would still need to live up to some certain level of quality.
Except if maybe they are the ones paying you
Only in that case,
to.
exactly,
All
yes.
right. So now, can you give us a breakdown of the most expensive transfer flops?
I mean, when we think about expensive transfer flops, there are quite a few that come to mind. If you think about the current most expensive goalkeeper in the world, Kepa, who was signed for £70 million by Chelsea. Currently, he's on loan at Bournemouth. It's after going on loan at Real Madrid, after being second choice while he was still at Chelsea. So if you look at how much Chelsea paid for him and the quality of performances that he delivered, it's very easy to see that this is someone who was a really expensive flop, especially for Chelsea.
Expensive flop. That's
Yeah,
one tag that you don't want to have.
unfortunately, it's a tag that a lot of people have had to carry. When you look at players like Ousmane Dembele, Coutinho, who both went to Barcelona with a lot of expectations. Ousmane Dembele was signed for £135 million at the time from Borussia Dortmund. Unfortunately, he was never able to live up to the hype or the quality that Barcelona expected. Ended up leaving to PSG after several injury spells. Ended up leaving to PSG for €50 million, which was much less than what Barcelona paid for him. You look at Coutinho as well, signed from Liverpool for £105 million. And his biggest highlight while he was at Barcelona was actually, in fact, scoring against the club while on loan at Bayern Munich.
I remember that day.
So you also have players like Antoine Griezmann, who did not live up to the hype. And in fact, his replacement at Atletico Madrid, Joao Felix, who was at the time the most expensive teenager in the world. And he got to Atletico Madrid and he just could not settle. Ended up going on loan to several other clubs, even to Barcelona, now to Chelsea, finally on a permanent deal. I mean, these are players that the clubs, after signing for huge amounts of money, had to find a backdoor way to get them out of the club just so that they will stop losing money. So these are players that I think would categorize as transfer flops. There are some that people would say maybe they were unlucky. A player like Eden Hazard, who went to Real Madrid, suffered with injuries, eventually, unfortunately, retired at the club at a very early age. If you would consider it that, if you consider that for £100 million, he was nothing like the player that they expected him to be while he was at Chelsea. Uh, And those are basically the examples that easily come to mind when you think of transfer flops.
Right. So, which clubs have had, shall we say, the misfortune of having to have all these flops?
I think in Europe it's probably going to be Barcelona. I mean, we mentioned already 3 players that they signed that just did not live up to expectation, were maybe not good enough. Well, not that they were not good enough. I mean, Antoine Griezmann is still one of the top players in the world, but it just did not work out with Barcelona. And I think another club that easily comes to mind would be Manchester United, who unfortunately, especially in recent times, have signed quite a bit. I mean, only during Ten Hag's tenure, they signed over 600 million euros worth of players. And it's hard to pinpoint even one that you would say, yes, this is a player that was worth the value, or this is a player that is quality, or this is a player that,
Are you trying to discount Anthony?
I mean, let's not disrespect him, but
Yeah.
still, the truth is the truth. I mean, there are another club that would struggle to get in, returns for the investment that they've made on players in recent times.
Do you think that the prices that these hefty price tags that were placed on these players were part of what like made them flop, or part of what contributed to them not living up to their potentials?
I think it's very possible because I mean, you've got players who were signed for large transfer fees, especially when they were young, maybe not as tested, maybe not as proven in terms of quality. Players like Dembele, players like Joao Felix, who were barely even 20 when they were signed for over 100 million euros. These things tend to weigh down players. Even a player like Griezmann or Shevchenko, who was already a seasoned player by the time that they moved to Griezmann to Barcelona, Shevchenko to Chelsea. Having that price tag means an extra layer of expectation. And when things are not going so well, everybody's going to look to you. And some players don't have the, should I say, character to be able to show that kind of pressure of knowing that, yes, you are the most expensive player that this club has ever signed. So when things are not going well, what can you really do? Yeah.
So it would seem that the hefty price tag that certain young players accrue can sometimes weigh them down and keep them from living up to their expectations and their potentials. So do you guys agree with this, or do you have a different opinion in mind? Can let us know your thoughts in the comments below. I am Anishilewo, Jimmy Anishilewo, and this is Money Talks, brought to you by Life Score Bets.